Yeah, morning everyone. This is a webinar we're doing today about navigating modern management. Agenda, hopefully the things that we'll get through today. Common misconceptions around what can be achieved, what's required to effectively implement modern management, stop aiming for hybrid, and maybe some, what does hybrid actually mean? And ways to combat that. And also hopefully some practical tech advice on how to actually get started on your modern management journey. Who are we? David.
So yeah, I'm David Brook. I'm the product manager here at PowerOn. I also frequently blog on EUC 365. So for anybody that's read my blog posts, brilliant, thank you. James, over to yourself.
Yeah, I'm James Robinson. I'm EUC Workstream Lead here at PowerOn. All of my socials and blogs and what have you are skipped to the endpoint. And I'm also Enterprise Mobility MVP. Throughout today, if you've got any questions, up in the top right, you should see chat and people, and there's also a Q&A. So feel free to throw any questions that are appropriate to what we're discussing. We'll try and take a little kind of mid-session break to see if there's anything that's pressing. Otherwise, we've got some Q&A time at the end. So yeah, let's start with actually what is modern management and why people get started on that journey. We speak to a lot of customers, and the trends and the patterns that come out of the end goals or the reasons that people want to move into modern management are fairly consistent. They want to improve the user experience, get better device management capability, improve their overall security posture, have device deployment flexibility, not necessarily have to like manually build devices, and also get some enhanced reporting and some device lifecycle management. Normally when we conduct consulting engagements, after some questioning, there tends to be themes that sit under those, which is why businesses tend to need to implement modern management. And that could be that there's a high number of BAU tickets, or lack of any external device management, device visibility issues, the actual human cost of doing those manual builds, or maybe a kind of lack of asset management, not knowing where devices are, what they're doing at any point in time, who they belong to, that sort of thing. So what is modern management and what isn't? So I'll start with the is. Modern management's a new way of managing devices. It's using a new tool set. It's you may not have had one before. You may be moving from a different MDM that can't provide the capabilities. Yeah, it's a new way of managing stuff. It's about removing your tech debt. Lots of businesses have multiple years of differing layers of technical debt, and moving to modern management gives you a perfect opportunity to try and remove those. Modern management's cloud native devices. It's having devices that can be anywhere, the whole work from anywhere thing, but still securing the user identity, the actual device itself, the data, more importantly. Shifting your network boundary. Normally, devices in an office, they're going to have a firewall in front of them. That is your network boundary, does all of your security. In modern management, that is the identity, the user identity, and the actual endpoint itself. Empowering the user. So back to the previous slide, one of the things that people want is to maybe try and reduce the effort of IT resources in having to respond to tickets to install this software, or do this specific thing on my device, allow me to do this, empowering the user, self-servicing applications, and actually treating the devices in a somewhat less controlled fashion, and reassessing your processes. Your processes might work, they might not right now. That might be one of the pain points that is wanting to help you move to modern management. But reassessing all of those processes, both people and technical, is important on that modern management journey. David?
Yeah, so what modern management isn't, moving on from James's point of reassessing your processes, is not using new tools in old ways. So if you're trying to use your old processes with new tool sets, the chances are you're going to become very stuck very quickly, because that just doesn't work. For example, AAD is not just the same as AD, it's a completely different identity provider. And Intune is not the same as Configuration Manager or other MDM tools. So using your same processes will not work. That also then follows on to GPOs, replicating your GPOs. How many people have worked in an environment where GPOs have been long-standing way before you started there and still have no idea what they do? Try to replicate that same GPO set into modern tooling is not the way you should be approaching a modern management project. Hybrid joined devices. So as we move through the journey, through the webinar, you'll understand this a little bit more. It's not saying hybrid joined devices is a modern management straight away. That's a great way to get started on modern management, but hybrid joined devices is not what you should be aiming for. You should be aiming for them cloud native devices. Full tunnel VPNs. So there is still a need for VPNs on occasion for accessing file shares and things like that when people are on the road. But full tunnel VPNs are not modern management. Something like a split tunnel VPN would be a more suitable scenario. But yes, going full tunnel is definitely not a modern management approach. Lockdown workstations. So I've come from this background myself, locking down workstation to the nth degree where nobody can do anything. Users feel powerless, and it reduces some job satisfaction in places. So really moving away from locking them down to empowering the user also brings some of that satisfaction back into the game. And one of the worst sayings that me and James really hate, that's the way we've always done it. Just because it's the way we've always done it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right way. Again, looking back to reassessing your processes, there is always improvements to be made on processes. Even as you step into modern management, the way you start it will not be the way you continue to do it. You will change it, and again, you will soon realize the way we've always done it should be a thing of the past.
Cool. Moving into what a modern management journey might look like. There's many steps to it. It's not a short process. It's not something that you can do and be done with by the end of next week. But most importantly, it starts with two key things: identity and access, and cloud files and services. The user identity, as mentioned, is one of the key things that actually provides security in modern management, and whether that's through things like MFA or other passwordless FIDO2 or temporary access passes. There's a number of secure passwordless methods. Conditional access, so actually designing an appropriate level of things and access that a user can and and can't access certain things from certain locations, and then also things like Defender for Identity to back up that on-prem identity as well. Cloud files and services, things like Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. If you've got on-prem web apps, publishing them via Azure App Proxy. If there's file shares that you can shift into Azure Files, provide different levels of access to, all of those things run into reducing the reliance on on-premise infrastructure and things like VPNs as well. And then cloud app security to help bolster that security of the data, because key things, the actual user identity and the security of your corporate data, like who do you want to access it, where from. From there, I'll skip through some of these because they're all interlinked, and they don't necessarily run in serial. All of this can happen in parallel, but you've got modern devices. Intune supports not just Windows, but Mac OS, iOS, Android. Recently, Chrome OS, Linux. Microsoft are wanting to build a fully featured and OS agnostic device platform. And then if you've got the addition of Microsoft hardware, things like Surfaces, that can add into that. But none of this is, none of those things are requirements. If you've got Lenovo's or HP's, that's all fine too. Device management, that's Intune itself. Things like autopilot, which is just bowling bumpers to out-of-box experience. It's a very, very small part of what Intune can do. Configs, apps, policies, and if you've got config manager, that co-management piece as well. Endpoint servicing, so keeping your M365 apps up to date, and keeping your devices up to date with Windows Update for Business. Endpoint security, again, some links somewhat into the identity and access and into cloud files and services. So accessing your device, securing it with Windows 5 for Business, and then Defender for Endpoint, and then you've got all of the actual DLP, insider risk management type stuff in the cloud. David, anything on virtualized endpoints?
Yeah, so virtualized endpoints is a really good way to not only reduce some of the cost to the business for short-lived devices, but the way I see and envisage Windows 365 and AAD being a big part of this modern management journey is sometimes we're a bit fearful of getting them devices and resetting them and making them AAD joined only, a bit of the hocus pocus around that, all the wizardry. The real good way to get started is using these virtualized endpoint technologies. So Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop can be native AAD only joined, and that's going to allow you to start breaking down some of your barriers in terms of you use this for a week and you'll start seeing some of them barriers and how you can work on them barriers through this journey. Starting with the identity, well, what issues have I got with the identity? What can't I do with this identity? And then again, going through the cloud file services and really going through this entire roadmap, you can use the virtualized endpoints to start figuring out what some of them blockers on this journey could be, and then start to remediate them and use that as a virtual endpoint.
And the flip side could be that you could use either Windows 365 or AVD to provide access to your on-prem stuff instead of having your devices being hybrid, right? So you have your cloud device.
Anybody that uses something like Citrix now that's got the remote app capabilities, Azure Virtual Desktop has that exact same thing. So if you want to start using cloud native endpoints, but you've got certain applications that require hardcore configuration to talk back to on-prem device AD objects and things like that, there's no reason you couldn't look to use something like remote apps from Azure Virtual Desktop to have that as like a thin app on a machine. You click on it, launches that, and then they use that like an old RDS or Citrix environment.
And all of that kind of wrap around with the monitoring and analytics and the capabilities, being able to assess device health, compliance, more holistic analytics on devices, things like if you've got specific models that are performing poorly or specific apps that keep crashing, Intune can give you all of that sort of data. And security monitoring, the links into the rest of the stack, how it feeds into things like Defender for Endpoint, provide a very seamless end-to-end security monitoring experience as well. And all of that leads to that whole zero trust. I prefer defense in depth, but the goal that many businesses are aiming towards from a security standpoint, covering the identities, the apps, endpoints, infrastructure, data, network, the whole lot, and moving towards a more zero trust infrastructure. Cool.
Just before we get into this section, James, just a reminder that the Q&A is open if you want to ask any questions. At the end of this section, we'll stop for a brief Q&A check and answer any questions sort of mid presentation. So if you have any, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we will come around to them at the end of this section.
Absolutely. So misconceptions. There's a few that come up more than others, and we'll aim to cover some of those first. And the first and biggest one is devices need to be hybrid joined. More often than not, that's just not true. And to reiterate that point, here's a couple of things that come up time and time again on why customers coming to us more often than not come with this thought that devices need to be hybrid because we need to access on-prem file shares. Nope. If you have got AD Connect and you've got a hybrid identity configured, so you've got your on-prem objects being synced up to AAD, accessing file shares, it just works. Wouldn't negate the need of line of sight to those file shares. If you're using something like Windows Hello for Business, there's Cloud Kerberos Trust, which is I think 4 lines of PowerShell, Dave, to
pretty much.
Yeah, to enable the passing of those kind of Kerberos tickets to then allow you to log in using Windows Hello for Business, but still access those on-prem file shares. Keeping config manager. Now, config manager's demise has been long anticipated, but it's still around and it's still got some far superior reporting. But your device doesn't need to be hybrid joined to use config manager. With the correct setup of the CMG and your Azure services, you can use an AAD only device to run config manager and keep the devices talking even when they are roaming to config manager. Yeah, and you can deploy it as part of an autopilot deployment. So for Azure AD join, still co-managed, you still push your apps.
Yeah, and what config manager also allows you to do as well is it allows you to control your adoption of some of the more modern management services, things like Windows Hello for Business, your apps, your compliance policies, etc., by using the core management settings. So you can then actively control the pace of adoption of certain services using core management policies from config manager to Intune.
Absolutely. We need hybrid to access the legacy application. Maybe. The big thing around hybrid versus AADJ is services or things that use that on-prem AD object for authentication. It's unusual for an application to use AD object-based authentication, but it's not impossible. Addressing that would be ideal, and at least knowing what things exist is a good place to start. Need hybrid to provide network access. Yeah, maybe. There's too much nuance in this one to go into things specifically, but again, that AD device object authentication plays a big role. If you've got something like MPS, that doesn't work. There are currently workarounds, but some upcoming changes are likely to stop that from working properly. So you really need to be looking at a network access control solution that integrates with AD and or Intune, and there is a list of those that Microsoft publishes, kind of approved network access control partners that enable that network access control in a cloud native state. Keep using our GPOs. Anything on this, David?
Yeah, so this makes me judder sometimes, and yes, Microsoft have got your analyze the GPO analysis tool and things inside Intune, but what I would say on this step is, why would you want to drag over 20, 30 years of technical debt? Again, looking at them policies that you probably have no idea what they do. Do you need them? Are you scared to turn them off? What is the reason you need to take them over? If you then start to think about, well, is there anything we can do? Please don't use the security baselines. There is other solutions out there. James's very own Open Intune baseline and things like that. But do very much consider reevaluating your GPOs and not taking them all over with you.
As you're assessing all of your processes, one of those things is going to be what you need to actually bring over into your new environment. Do you really want to clutter that up with all of that tech debt? There's also some nuance around applying Intune policies over devices that are managed via GPO. For lack of a better way of putting it, it's a minefield. There's only certain instances that things work. So would advise to be very careful if you are applying Intune policy to devices managed via GPO. Quite often we see some rogue GPO or a setting that's in a GPO that nobody ever expected it to be in, that causes all sorts of problems, and at the bottom of it could cause a security risk on a device, because certain things think that they're applying certain settings that they might not be. So yeah, it's use with caution, and be very clear about the management plane that certain settings are coming from. We need hybrid to be secure. A ridiculous statement. In fact, yeah, one of the key or biggest threat targets for malicious actors are going to be things like on-prem servers, and specifically DCs. And more often than not, they tend to be the least secure because nobody really wants to touch them, just in case they mess something up. And companies who want to actively reduce their business risk adopt Azure AD join to just completely cut out that potential attack vector. So yeah, more often than not, fully Azure AD cloud managed devices are more secure than anything would be if you've got those ties to on-prem.
Yeah, just to add to this as well, Julie, just go back to that slide a second. The to be secure part and talking about accessing AD and things like that. Your barrier to entry is no longer that firewall that's in your data center or in your multiple data center. In the modern world, your barrier and your identity and your devices are that initial barrier of entry. So looking at more modern tools and conditional access and things like that are where you will then to start being more secure around that first barrier of entry towards your estate.
Absolutely. And in terms of how that feeds into reassessing your processes, if the barrier to entry for a malicious person is an identity, user identity, or a device, actually adequate user training and engagement is probably one of those key processes that you should look at improving, rather than just kind of dictating stuff, actually engaging with your user base, as they're the ones that provide that first line of defense for all of your corporate data. So moving on from devices need to be hybrid joined, having devices in Intune means you're modern managed. Not quite. While you can utilize those new tools, Windows Update for Business, application deployment to your existing device fleet, those devices are still tied to your on-premise infrastructure until the point at which they're rebuilt as ADJ. So any changes that you might make on-prem could potentially have a negative impact to those devices. Saying that, those devices not being quote unquote modern managed, that's fine too. And we'll come back to that one in a minute. David, this is an entirely EUC driven project, right?
Yeah, this is where you are prone to failure. If this is just being driven by a single team, which is your EUC team, which would love to stop having all them tickets coming in and have the beautiful new world, the project is going to fail. This is a business project starting with your users, your stakeholders, your C-suites. This has involvement from everybody. This needs buy-in to make sure you can succeed with this project. If you don't have adoption and people are fighting against your processes, you need your key stakeholders there to reinforce the message of why you're doing this. Having one team battling the business, you're prone to failure.
Yeah, everyone's going to have a bad time and everyone's going to get frustrated. Yeah, if you have got separate security and networking and infrastructure and EUC teams, there's no better time than the present to start talking to each other and working on the same goals moving forward.
Or be in a big room with a big pizza and just align the proper goals going forward. Yes.
Pizza sorts everything out. Every device must be modern managed. No. Move what makes sense. If you have a device that is a desktop and it's connected to a CNC machine, if you're in manufacturing, do you need to wipe that device, make it Azure AD joined, maybe do autopilot self-deploy? No. Is it fine how it is? If it works for you and your business, absolutely. You don't have to make everything cloud native, make what makes sense to be cloud native. Just be aware that you are going to then have those differing management planes, and then you have this delineation between managing those domain joined devices versus devices that might be fully cloud native, but there might be that crossover, things like Windows Update for Business that crosses both of those, so you can still keep those devices up to date, still push applications to them perhaps, but in terms of management, they're still domain joined, and that's okay. It's just a change in tool set. AAD is not just AD in the cloud. It's a fully fledged identity provider. It has a lot of capabilities. It does things like MFA and conditional access. It's an IDP. It might be syncing your user objects, device objects even, up into it from on-prem, but it itself is its own identity provider. If you've got SaaS applications, you can do things like SSO, configure that directly through Azure AD. You can then apply conditional access policies to those. There's a lot of functionality, and the same goes for thinking config manager is just Intune, right, David?
Yeah, so I see that we see a lot of this on social media that, oh, config manager did this and Intune did this. Intune is not trying to be config manager, and although there is some features coming across and there's some better iterations coming across, there is never going to be feature parity for every single feature. Config manager is not Intune. It's a completely different way it works. The reporting, yes, it's a little bit more cumbersome to get some of the reports out of Intune into sort of Power BI and things like that. It's not native SQL queries and things. But having that mindset that I'm just going to be able to get this, or I need this, then again, it's going back to reviewing the processes and what you actually do need versus what you're actually getting right now, and then work on a more modern approach to getting that.
Absolutely. Just doing a little Q&A check. See, there's a question from Joel. File shares are required and AD Kerberos auth is configured. Do you map the shares with Intune config profile and handle this otherwise?
Yeah, so I just started typing the reply as well. I'll send the reply out after we spoke about it a little bit. But James, I'll be interested to hear your take on this.
Well, there are a couple of ways of doing it, I think. It does depend on how complicated your file share layout is. If it's a DFS file share and you've got some GPO with 400 entries in it with complicated rules, that doesn't translate into Intune. You can't kind of replicate that. If it's just a file share that maybe just has a root and then some NTFS permissioned subfolders, then you could either there's some scripts. I think there's a website that can create a PowerShell script to help map them. There's an ADMX you can import into Intune that then helps create the profiles that you can then assign to users. Your thoughts, David?
Yeah, so I've done this for another customer as well, which they started out, we did it with a Win32 and a scheduled task. Not the way to do it. Consulting through that process, we then moved over to a community provided ADMX, which is, I believe, is from How to Manage Devices, which is a Noop. And that completely changed the way they did things. There is policy, like you end up with a few policies for the different drives. It's not like GPO and you can configure it like what group it assigns to and things inside there. But yes, it's manageable via these custom ADMXs. You can do it with Win32, you can do it with scripts. There's many approaches to how you can complete that single task. It's all about using the one that works best. And I would say for simplicity, my own personal view would be to use something like the ADMX template and map your drives using that.
And to build on that, try and reduce your management overhead by utilizing things that already exist. And by that, I mean, if you are using Teams and maybe you have a finance team and that is controlled, so only people in finance will be in that team, that's an M365 group. Thus, you can pivot on that group to do assignments of things like policies, applications even. So rather than having to create another group and then manage that group, which adds additional overhead to your team, remove that, and that does rely on the sanity of data. But if you can use something that already exists, do it rather than creating more work for yourself. Yeah, cool. Well,
yeah, that was the only question so far.
Yeah, keep an eye. If anything else comes up to anybody, please do throw it in the Q&A. So without spending too much on this next section, we've been compiling a list of themes and specific issues or blockers that we regularly see businesses hit, and then the types of things that you can kind of look at doing to maybe try and free yourself from that blocker or keep moving stuff forward with that intention of not having hybrid joined devices. So stuff relating to AD device object authentication, line of business apps. Is there a new version, SaaS version? Is it a web app? Can you publish it via app proxy? And as we mentioned earlier, alternate access solutions, Windows 365, or AVD, published app, that sort of thing. We mentioned network access control. If you've got MPS, Cisco ICE, if you can move to certificate-based authentication, So are you able to get a certificate to that device and pivot on that, which I think is how the Cisco ICE native integration works from memory. I haven't done it myself, but yeah, if there's a solution that integrates natively, that's the thing to look at. Print management. How's your history with printers been, David?
Yeah, I'm not a massive fan of printers. Managing print servers with drivers and getting the
Is
wrong
anybody?
driver on and then on print. Oh, yeah, it's not a fun job, isn't printers?
Yeah.
But again, there is SaaS solutions available. There's Universal Print, the thing like Printix, Papercut, etc. There is an alternative approach to looking at print management from cloud native endpoints.
Yeah. Depending on your licensing, you might have Universal Print already included. Like David said, there's third-party things like Printix. If you're looking at this as an entire cloud native move, that includes everything, including your print management. And if you can't office space all of your printers, then and you absolutely need to have those printers around, then there are ways. Some are more elegant than others. File shares, redirected folders, OneDrive, no folder move, but that would mean that you'd have to go through a process of rolling back that folder redirection first. They don't play nicely with each other and can cause more problems. You need to do the rollback first and then implement OneDrive KFM. SMB v1, it's a big security risk. Move it ASAP to literally anywhere else. DFS file shares, I think we discussed, it potentially has quite a complex structure and configuration. Obviously, your environment, every environment is different. Ideally, move stuff to a place where it makes sense, either with some support, some sort of SharePoint migration, or if it's just being used as a kind of dumping ground. And then data analysis, when was stuff last accessed? Can you throw stuff into cold storage? If you've got on-prem NAS boxes that don't integrate, unsupported in Intune, I think this is something that I've seen businesses that have things like departments that work on big like Photoshop or Premiere files, and you've got to do something that makes sense for your business. Would it make sense to throw all of your videos into Azure files or SharePoint Online? No. You might need still local storage, but how that is accessed would need to be taken into consideration. Identity. If you're using another identity provider like PingID or Okta, why? What's the reason? When was it put in? Does that person who put it in even work there anymore? You're paying for another third-party tool to do something that Azure AD does natively. You can reduce your cost of ownership by using Azure AD properly. ADFS. Microsoft are very keen for people to stop using ADFS, and in fact, they have monthly webinars on helping people move away from ADFS, and it's the NCSC's recommendation to use Cloud Native Auth using AD Connect or AD Connect Cloud Sync and password hash sync. So ADFS, try and shift off it because it can cause problems. It can make everything a lot more complicated. And yeah, Microsoft want to move you away from it. And I'm sure I can find some links to the Microsoft webinars on that if anyone's interested. Non-Microsoft multi-factor authentication. Any thoughts on this one, David?
Yeah, so I've seen things cause issues in the past with things like Okta Verify and there's Google Duo and things like that. It just makes it a little bit more cumbersome to get things done. It's not integrated, so it's not seamless. Again, removing that, reducing your total cost of ownership by transferring to something that Azure does natively. There's apps like MS Authenticator. They're now building it into Outlook for Authenticator Lite. It is definitely one of the things you should look to removing from your environment.
And you also get somewhat hamstrung with what you can do with conditional access and things like authentication strengths as well. You missing additional security configuration that you would get if you were able to utilize the authenticator. Processes and tooling. Most people we speak to, their IT teams do remote management in a certain way. More often than not, there's some historical login scripts. You might need laps. I spoke to one customer that this is before Windows Laps was, wait, is it GA now or still in preview?
I believe it's GA.
But before that was released, the blocker to being ADJ was that Laps wasn't native. And when investigating into like what are you using Laps for, it turned out that they needed a local admin account on each device to be able to rejoin it to the domain when it fell off. Maybe not required if all devices are not joined to a domain. And yeah, privileged access management. Assess all of the use cases. There may be different ways of doing it. There may be additional tools that are being built in. They might have an additional cost associated with them, like Intune endpoint privilege management. But doing that assessment, why are we using this, is all part of that, assessing the processes. How to be in your modern management journey. Immediately bring all of those domain joined devices into hybrid management via config manager or GPO. The GPO, incredibly easy to set up. Make sure that your ADMX central templates are up to date. Get them hybrid joined and Intune enrolled. You don't have to do anything in Intune immediately. Make sure it's live. But getting them into that state is something that you can do without any impact, and it's a very low effort task to do, and then you can at least have them visible as soon as possible. Analyze your environment, your infrastructure, your networks, security. More importantly, user and device personas. What types of users do you have? Where are they? What teams are they in? Try and work out those trends. What applications they use? You may know this already. You might not. But without knowing that, it makes it very hard to move forward and build the right solutions for those devices. If they're shared devices, they need to be treated differently when they're enrolled into Intune. Or if you're looking to make them cloud native, and POC the AAD join as soon as you can. David, you mentioned earlier that getting that visibility early means that you can.
Yeah, using them virtualized endpoints like Windows 365, you can get a trial for 30 days. You can go just try out proof of concept in AAD joining a device and see how we get on. You can also, if you've got a laptop in the cupboard, if you're a tech and you've got a cupboard full of laptops, go grab one out and just build it with an ISO, and you can AAD join it from the device itself and just see what issues you've got, see if you've got any issues, see what are your actual blockers. The best way of finding things out, and people have done this through their entire careers, the only way of finding the real problem is by doing. So why not start that doing journey today?
So often we speak to people who think they know what the blockers might be, but until you've proved it is a blocker, it's purely speculation.
It's a myth.
Yeah, try it out, see what doesn't work. Beginning of the journey, implement some of the core cloud functionality, getting the holistic analytics with endpoint analytics and Intune. Windows Update for Business. If you're coming from Config Manager, would you like to not really ever have to worry about patching again? That's Windows Update for Business can allow you to do that. Deploying apps. I think you mentioned something around if you're transitioning from Config Manager, David, and the app deployment side.
So if you're transitioning from Config Manager, you can display both of your application sets within the company portal. So by using the company portal, you can give people that single view of entry, but have applications from different sources. So you can start to adopt, so new applications you start to do via Intune, and then you've got your present applications in Config Manager, start to migrate one by one. You don't have to do it as a big bang. Just going back to the Windows Update for Business, James, we've got a question from Mohammed in the chat as well. So recently, the past couple of weeks, Microsoft have released driver and firmware updates natively GA into Intune. If this isn't a way to go to Microsoft Windows Update for Business, then I don't know what is. I can't tell you how challenging it has been over the past years managing driver and firmware updates from Config Manager. But with Windows Update for Business, Mohammed's asking, how does the driver profile sense the manufacturer of the computers and pull the drivers? So just to answer, I won't go really too far in depth. Mohammed, you're more than welcome to reach out to us after the webinar. But what happens is when you enable the policies, your device does a scan with the Windows Update for Business service. It will pick up the INF files on your device, see what it's got there, and it also picks up your what they call CHIDs and HIDs, so your computer hardware IDs and your hardware IDs, and it matches them against I think they've got 4 billion drivers. The last time I spoke to the product team, it matches them against their driver database. I couldn't imagine a database with 4 billion records, but it matches them, and then it provides the best driver suited to your machine. Now that might not be a vendor specific driver. It might be better matched having a hardware vendor driver over the top of the computer vendor, but it does all that holistically in the background for you. It works really well, and the driver updates as well use encapsulation, so you don't need to worry about providing BIOS passwords and things to update the BIOSes. But yeah, that's in essence how it picks the driver update for your machines.
I'm just going to throw this across, which is we've got some identified new drivers. This is a manual review policy, but you can automatically approve them as well and not have to worry about them if you're confident in your devices and what the vendors are throwing into the Windows Update catalog. Yeah, thanks for the overview of that one, David.
Yeah, I could talk about drivers all day. If you want to have a chat about them, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a chat about them.
Moving into a short term, prioritizing a resolution of any of those hard blockers, hopefully identified during either your POC or your persona work. Knowing what you have to solve then allows you to actually solve those. And while that's in a short place here, that might take longer. Maybe you've got a hardware renewal, a software renewal that is a while away, and one of those blockers is only going to fix itself after when that comes up, and you can look at implementing something else. It might be best to hold off until that point, rather than trying to front load some effort into doing something like hybrid Azure AD join autopilot, which is not good and causes so much pain for many people. It's much better to try and prioritize clearing those blockers than implementing a strategic solution. Moving forward, you've cleared those blockers. New devices, make them cloud native where it makes sense.
Yeah, you can also, in this step as well, you can also work with your vendors to enroll your devices into your Intune tenant, and they will get the ESP and autopilot profile without you having to touch it. You could ship directly to a user without having to ever physically unbox that device. This, again, empowering the user, speeding up your process times. You can do that natively from the factory to the door by having your suppliers onboard these devices into Intune for you using the partner center.
Yep. And bring them into autopilot, upload the device hashes.
Yep.
Longer term, start moving those legacy devices to being cloud native via attrition. So start as leavers processes. If you've got failed devices, end of life. If you've got hardware refresh, use that as a good opportunity to move those devices into a cloud native state. If maybe you were going through a Windows 11 project, might also be a really good opportunity to kill two birds with one stone and do both of them at the same time. And then towards your goals, if at the start of this whole thing you identified that your business identified that you want to pull out of data centers and reduce the reliance on that on-prem infrastructure, once you're in a state that all of those devices are going out as cloud native, that you can start approaching those goals. Cool. To summarize, it's not just an EUC project, as David mentioned. Mindsets are the hardest thing to change. That whole "it's how we've always done it" mentality. It's really important to know that Intune has a service release every month. Every month is going to bring changes or additions. You can't opt out of those. They're coming. The historical way of being steadfast in we'll wait until the service pack 1, which is something I heard in relation to Windows 11, even though service packs haven't been a thing since what, Windows 7. That way of thinking is not sustainable moving forward. It's sort of a adapt or die, and everyone needs to kind of move along with it. Stakeholder engagement is key. It needs to be a business-led project, because if it's just an EUC project, it's going to have a bad time. David?
Yeah, so it's not just a big bang, not like the world started, and yeah, it's modern management is definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow. Anybody that's got the misconception it's going to happen tomorrow, you're going to be in for a very, very long drive. Modernize by attrition, as James mentioned. Start with your starters, leavers, failed devices, end of life devices, and start getting them out there. Just by your daily processes. And that then moves very nicely into you can control the pace of change. If you then decided to pick up a project, you can identify areas of your business that you want to focus on first, and you can control that pace of adoption throughout your organization.
And go cloud native. Just conscious of the time we've got left. Aim for every device to be cloud native. Hybrid join by exception. Devices that still need to be, as we've kind of gone through. There's no engineering effort being put into on-prem technologies. AD has not had any new features since Server 2016. Every config manager release is pushing more and more stuff to being co-managed and managed through Intune. the writing's on the wall, and the sooner you can start that process, the better off your business will be. A couple more questions came into the chat.
Yeah, so I'll take Simon's, and you can take Mark and Carol's if you like.
Yeah.
So Simon, so there is a couple of things you can do. There is if you use it thinking of things like Adobe or some well-known apps, Patch My PC offers the ability to literally click and create them. So Patch My PC might be an offering, and that also offers updates for these third-party applications as well. Then if you want to look at changing your tool set for packaging applications going forward, something like the PowerShell deployment toolkit may be worth reviewing. In terms of migrating the apps, there was a script that was previously written by a gentleman called Ben Whitmore. I think his web is Byte Ben, that tried to achieve that same thing. And the MS Endpoint Manager team also have, they call it the Intune App Factory, that may be worth looking at as well. But there is loads of different solutions and variables that you'd need to take into account in what you was choosing. But yeah, if you want to look at repackaging them yourself, something like PSADT would be a recommendation from myself, because that will allow you to have a standard format of being able to deploy them applications.
Doing an assessment of those apps as well, it might be something that's in the Microsoft Store. You might be able to deploy it and then not have to worry about updates. Do you even need that application at all? Opportunity.
You've also got the
assess.
That's a good point. You've also got the Winget capabilities now in Intune as well, where you can select apps and install them via Winget in Intune.
Any way to convert hybrid device to AD without rebuild? No. And there is unlikely to be. There are too many things that you could introduce as issues trying to do that. There are a couple of things on the market that say they can do that by doing user profile migrations and stuff. I think the point to make is that if you've got a device that has been around in your estate for a while, what about that script that somebody ran 2 years ago that dumped some registry keys? If you're transitioning that device across, do you know that happened? Do you know what state the device is in? And would you really want to even have a tool that yeah, it's all about transitioning that tech debt, but no, there's not a way to convert a device without rebuilding it.
Microsoft actively discouraged you and hosted a chat about it a few months back. They actively discourage you from trying to do this.
Yeah, it causes more problems. So yeah, unfortunately not. Remote control with admin privilege was at the SCCM client. There are plenty of third-party tools. There's TeamViewer. There's remote help, or remote help in Intune. If you're in academia, it's included in your license. It's free with 365A, 3A5 licensing, if I remember rightly. And but admin, you would still need a user on the other end of it. As for that admin process, potentially trickier. You would likely need some sort of local admin account that the person connecting to that device would be able to elevate to, or some sort of separate account that they can elevate against. But there's no built-in control in Intune, and without the SCCM client, if you're in a config manager environment, I think you would have the SCCM client. So I'm guessing that question was without config. Remote help is expensive. Yes.
Yes, but just to answer that, James, that we're not saying you want to get rid of config manager. There is reasons you can keep config manager around, have all of your policies and apps via Intune, you can still have the config manager installed on your devices and still use config manager for remote help, and that'll cost you nothing additional. So we're not saying you need to uninstall config manager for modern management, but you need to start thinking about using cloud native technologies to manage the endpoint, and using config manager for remote help is essentially like using something like Beyond Trust or TeamViewer by installing another piece of software. So that, yeah, you can keep config manager and just have that to do remote help.
I think that the bottom
It's
line
a lot
is
of
that
infrastructure.
that there's going to be a licensing cost somewhere. If you have an enterprise agreement, it might be worth speaking to your Microsoft person. Microsoft are keen to keep you in their stack of products. Otherwise, yeah, I think you'd have to investigate a third-party product, unfortunately. Cool. I don't think there are any other questions. I realise we're maybe a couple of minutes over, so thank you for everybody who joined. We will get the recording out within the next 24 hours, and a couple of things that we've discussed. We'll get some information out on those, and if you heard something that was particularly interesting and you want to speak more about, then absolutely reach out, and we will kind of follow that up. Otherwise, thank you all for attending, and maybe speak to some of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.